It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. Here in Nigeria, labor unions have suspended their planned strike action slated to commence on Wednesday over the scrapping of fuel subsidy by the federal government. It follows talks between government officials and organized labor representatives in Abuja. Our State House correspondent, Adesoa Omoran, reports.
Representatives of the government and the Nigeria Labour Congress arrived at the presidential villa. It's the third in a series of meetings since President Bola Tinubu announced the removal of subsidy on petrol in his inaugural speech on May 29. This meeting comes after a previous deadlock with the NLC, who had declared an indefinite strike starting on Wednesday this week. It also comes a day after government had met with the Trade Union Congress in the absence of the NLC. After hours of deliberations, a recess was taken to consult with the National Executive Council of the NLC. However, the arrival of members of the Trade Union Congress, led by its president, signaled the continuation of the marathon meeting. After over 6 hours, Speaker of the House of Representatives discloses the outcome of the meeting in a 7-point resolution to include the establishment of a joint committee to review proposals for wage increase, as well as the review of the World Bank Finance Cash Transfer Scheme.
As you are aware, the $800 million loan did not really capture the low-income government workers. So basically, we'll be talking about how to include them in that scheme. 3, the federal government, the TUC, and the NLC to revive the CNG conversion program earlier agreed with labor centers in 2021 and work out detailed implementation and timing. 4, the labor centers and the federal government to review issues hindering effective delivery in the education sector and propose solutions for implementation. Centers and the federal government to review and establish the framework for completion of the rehabilitation of the nation's refineries. 6, the federal government is to provide a framework for the maintenance of roads and expansion of rail networks across the country. All other demands submitted by the TUC, and that's the 7th, all other demands submitted by the TUC to the federal government will be assessed by the joint committee. Consequently, ladies and gentlemen, the parties agreed as follows. 1, the NLC is to suspend the notice of strike forthwith to enable further consultations. 2, the TUC and the NLC to continue the ongoing engagements with the federal government and secure closure on the resolutions above. And finally, the labor centers and the federal government to meet on June 19, 2023, to agree on an implementation framework.
On his part, the NLC president explains their shift in demanding a reversal of the petrol price hike and calling off the planned strike.
You can see that nothing is yet in concrete terms. So at a joint date, we'll go into more specifics to make sure this knotty issue is resolved. We have come with a more concrete reality and framework and alternative. The CNG alternative is better than the price even before the increment.
In the midst of the meeting, the National Industrial Court issued a restraining order against the organized labor from embarking on any form of strike, a ruling that the NLC president claimed to be unaware of. Adesoa Omoran, Arise News.
Also, the joint health sector unions and Assembly of Healthcare Professional Associations have suspended its indefinite strike for 21 days. That decision comes after talks between the unions and President Bola Tinubu. Johesu's national vice president says progress has been made following that meeting with the president. There, President Tinubu reiterated his administration's resolve to revive and restore public confidence in the health sector. The acting chairman of the union urged the president to invest in healthcare infrastructure and workers' welfare to curb brain drain. Well, Mr. K, 2 strikes averted, well, postponed. We don't know if they would come back, but at least temporarily averted. Your take on the stories, please.
Well, I'm smiling because the first thing is it's obvious that those in government now, they're very savvy. They know the right things to do sometimes, and they're doing it. My first thought was that while they're busy talking to the labor unions, they already got lawyers in and they've gone to court, they've got the judgment. So whether the unions like it or not, they've already got a judgment that will ensure that the labor unions cannot legally go on strike. And it's a sign of people in position of leadership that understands how to use their office and how to get the results. The previous government probably wouldn't have done that. They wouldn't have gone to court. So I will say the president and his team at the moment, they know how to use their powers. They know how to get the results that they want to get. So kudos to them for doing that. Some people will say it's a bit underhand. You're discussing with someone and you're already going to court to go and get a judgment. But that's what politicians do. They know how to use these tactics to get the result that they require. So it is good. It's also good that the labor unions, even though Ajero said he's not aware, the president of NLC says he's not aware that this happened, that there was any court judgment against them, but they've also agreed to stay away from strike. So it is good that there will be no strike. So the government and the union need to come to an agreement and find something that works for Nigerians, because at the end of the day, Nigerians are struggling. Nigerians are suffering. I wake up every day and come out of my house and I see people suffering. I know that people are suffering. And I want to believe that Mr. President and his team, they are aware that there is suffering in the land and they've got to work on it. On the issue of the health workers, it is also good that the health workers have called off their strike because hospitals need to be open. There is need to improve on our health care. A lot of money has got to go into that sector. Pay doctors better, pay nurses better. Everybody working in the healthcare sector, they've got to be looked after because these people are pretty much like our soldiers, like our foot soldiers. They're putting their lives on the line on a daily basis. So we've got to give them everything that is required. So I hope that the new president, now President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, will make sure that whatever is required to help us revive our health sector, he will do it so that nobody in government will have to go abroad, including himself. And I must be very emphatic, nobody in government will have to go anywhere outside Nigeria for any kind of treatment.
Well, thank you.
Okay, 4 unions, not 2, 4 have suspended strike. The JOHESU, the Joint Health Workers Union, the HAPA, which is the Assembly of Health Professionals, the Nigeria Labour Congress, the Trade Union Congress. 4 of them have suspended their strikes. Now, on the surface of it, you may say that that shows some dexterity on the part of the new president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. However, this suspension is based on the part of the health professionals on the basis of promise, personal promise by the president. JOHESU, the Joint Health Workers Union, says he's suspending his strike for 21 days because the president has said, look, let me look into the matter and let me see what I can do. And it's on that same basis that HAPA also suspended his strike. With the TUC and the NLC, if you want to make categorical statements, you say, well, they met last Wednesday. That ended in a deadlock. There was another meeting on Sunday, which the Nigerian Labour Congress boycotted. It was attended only by the Trade Union Congress. And I said yesterday that, look, the demands by the Trade Union Congress are not necessarily divergent from the demands of the NLC. We talked yesterday about the NLC not showing up at the Sunday meeting. But it then turned out that the NLC at the meeting that was called yesterday showed up. And we've been given the details of the outcome of that meeting by Femi Gbajabiamila, who combines the dual position of Speaker of the House of Representatives and Chief of Staff to the president. And what are the details? One, minimum wage, a tripartite committee to be set up. We made a point on this same program yesterday that based on experience, we have seen that, look, working out the minimum wage in Nigeria can be a very problematic situation. After all, under President Buhari, it took series of meetings, more than 1 year, and since that 2019 decision, many states have not been able to pay. Now, TUC is demanding an increase of minimum wage from 30,000 to 200,000. When is that going to be resolved? Many of the other agreements on that list, as read out by Gbajabiamila, they appear very nebulous to me. For example, the thing about education. Who does not know that education is an important thing that you have to address? Okay, roads and fixing roads, making roads work, that's not the thing that you can do overnight. It took the Buhari administration up to about 8 years to be able to come back to us, to say, this is what we have been able to achieve in terms of roads. There are roads that have not still been completed, okay? And then, of course, the CNG conversion program. It was former Minister of State for Petroleum, Timi Presiva, High Chief Timi Presiva, who talked about that. Nobody did anything about compressed gas for moving vehicles around. But the NLC, through Ajero, is saying, can we go back to that? All these are things that will take like the next 2-3 years to resolve, even if any progress is made. And that's why I took special notice of Joe Ajero, president of the NLC, statement that, look, the thing is not over. This is just like a suspension. So what has happened is that you find a situation where organized labor is saying, well, this government is new, let's at least listen to them. And the associated question, the ancillary question will be, what should have come first? Should the government have taken that decision on day one unilaterally, or should it have given itself a wiggle room from the point of view of strategy, of management of the public policy process, to say, okay, let's even talk to these people first, get their buy-in, get their sense of ownership before we go to the public. So there's a problem here, as I argued yesterday, in terms of policy, public policy management. I don't know too many people who can argue with that. If you want to argue, well, come and argue with me on that particular score. So these are the issues here. So, well, you raised the point also about the court of Justice Anuwe, saying, well, this is the position of the court. And it's important to look at the details of the ruling of the court. The court acted essentially, the industrial court, as a court of public policy. That if you go on strike on Wednesday, it will affect ASU, university's calendar. It will affect students who are writing WAEC, and it will be very disruptive. Part of the responsibility of the law courts is to ensure social stability, is to act as a modulating mechanism within society. And I could see the angle from which, the judge was coming from. So she was acting just to maintain public policy. But even then, all of these things are still in the air. The Juhesu, they suspended their strike. The organized labor, they are saying, well, we have not been served, but when we are served, we'll go to court. The case has been postponed till June 19th. So I don't think anybody should bring out the drums and the cymbals, over the latest developments in this matter. I have described it as Act 1, Scene 1, and I have argued that what President Tinubu has been presented with is the Gordian knot. The Gordian knot, the acid test for every government that has tried to deal with the issue of deregulation of the downstream sector, or if you like, as ordinary people call it, fuel subsidy removal. How he deals with it, we'll see. But it's the first also major acid test of his administration, in my view.
Absolutely. Well, just very quickly, I'll just mention that one of the things I didn't see or hear from the Speaker of the House of Representatives and Chief of Staff, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, was the request, or perhaps one of the conditions from the NLC from the beginning of the negotiations, to revert to the old price of PMS. And that was one of the reasons why they said they didn't attend the meeting on Sunday, because they said that's the basis of conversation. Obviously, that hasn't happened, and they have still decided to postpone the strike action, including, of course, the court ruling. So that's one area. Now, with regards to that, the argument for that is that what one would say that in previous times, look at 2012, or at other times when there's been a move to remove fuel subsidy, and there were agitations, and then there was a reversal to status quo before coming back. It never went back. It became, from that moment, unsuccessful. It was literally not achievable. And one of the points we have made a number of times on this show is the fact that it has to go. Last year alone, the amount paid on fuel subsidy was about over 4 trillion naira, which was higher than the combined allocation to health and education. I think it's important in information management to let people, especially Nigerians, understand the true picture of what we're facing, so that it is clear that it's not only because the government wants to make life harder, or this is a tough government. It is that it is impracticable and unwise to continue with its payment. I think that has been established a number of times. So just wanted to point that out, that perhaps NLC has now realized that, or perhaps are no longer pushing for a reversal of the amount of money. What they're, however, pushing for in the 7 agenda is for them to review the World Bank Finance Cash Transfer Scheme and propose inclusion of low-income earners in the program. I think this is something that's a quick win, because, as Dr. Bati mentioned, a number of things on that 7-point agenda are long-term gains, and I'm sure they're not planning to go on, be on the negotiation table to help Nigerians by looking at things like, expansion of the rail program, adoption of the compressed national gas, which was initiated by the national gas program in 2020, and the fact that not much has been done with that. And if you look at other countries around the world who have tried to embrace CNG, it hasn't been largely successful. Yes, countries like Qatar, Australia have expanded their gas, gas revenue through that, or their gas program, but in terms of the take by other countries, it hasn't been largely successful. And how long will it take us to do so? The plan was that by 2021, about 1 million cars would be converted to using compressed natural gas as a source of fueling. Unfortunately, that hasn't quite worked. Again, long term, that might work, but in the short term, let's look at our Nigerians. Let's look at the most vulnerable. It's what we've been pushing for, and it's what we're hoping has been high on the agenda for the NLC, the TUC, organized labor in these negotiations with government. In the next few days, what Nigerians want to hear and want to see is how the government plans to help them cushion the impact of the removal of fuel subsidy. That's what we want to hear. How do you plan to spend the $800 million from the World Bank? What is the plan for that? Do we have a register of the most vulnerable? Yes, we have, the national register for, that the Buhari administration created. But there have been conversations around that as to how authentic, how, in terms of an independent evaluation or review of how solid that list is, or that national register is. How do we begin to meet the needs of others? Let's not forget that they postponed the national census that was meant to happen before the end of the Buhari administration. That hasn't happened yet. We need a new date for that, because if we're going to manage resources, we need to know the numbers that we're dealing with. We need to have a capture of the people we need to understand demography of people in Nigeria. If we don't have that, and we have monies to spend to look after the poor, how will we identify them? So these are some of the things that we're looking to hear. Great to hear that the strike has been postponed. I mentioned it yesterday that I felt it was a bit too hasty. It's, a number of people will suffer, but also beyond that, let them on the conversation table put Nigerians first and ensure that we find out how they hope to look after Nigeria in the next few days and weeks.